We're thrilled to have Nico Albert on the show with us today of Burning Cedar Indigenous Food Sovereignty. That was a long intro, but so necessary. Welcome, Nico.
Thank you. Well, no, I'm so happy to be here.
We are so grateful to have you on the show to share about Indigenous food revitalization and allowing the language of food and ancestral lifeways to empower people, Native communities, and all peoples. Is there a particular way you would like to open the show?
Well, I always love introducing myself in my Cherokee language, so I'll begin by doing that. Tio nigada nigo dawadoa, chichalagi tigarasta yahaski ale nanehia ulistaidi degadeshkwa. So I simply said, my name is Nico Albert, and I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And I study and prepare and share traditional Indigenous foods. And so that's everything about me, really, in a nutshell, is that my passion is Indigenous food and healing through Indigenous foods.
It's so powerful what you are doing. And I know that there is a movement behind this, again, revitalization of Indigenous foods. You know, I want to go back to the history, because people really need to understand the history of what has happened. For some people, it's very tangential, it's very abstract, but it's important to connect the dots. And what would you like listeners to know about that history behind the Trail of Tears? What would you like them to understand about that?
Well, I am so glad that you provided all of the context that you did at the opening of this episode, because that's the most important thing to start with, is to understand the scope of the genocide that has happened in this country. And it's something that, people tend to minimize in history books. And, it's a couple sentences and a whole long log of the glory of the building of our nation. And, there's a lot more to it that happened that has really led us to where we are today. And the main thing to understand from a food and culture perspective is yes, there has been an enormous loss of life. And yes, the lifestyle for Indigenous people has changed, just as lifestyle has changed for all Americans, just with the evolution of time and technology. But there was a very drastic and abrupt, fast shift in lifestyle and culture that happened, that caused a profound loss that the Indigenous community is still mourning and still recovering from today. And that is what a lot of our work centers on, is healing from this great loss that was removal. So at the beginning of colonization, you talk about the removal through the Trail of Tears. It started well before the Trail of Tears, but really, there's this great map that you can see that starts out with all of what we call Turtle Island, North America, the lands that were occupied by Indigenous people, which is every single square inch of this continent. I think a lot of people have sort of a different idea that you get from history books, which are largely written by,
by people.
Yes.
I mean, that's the truth.
Exactly. So they're written from a certain perspective, and they give the idea that there are, all of these small, isolated communities of Native peoples in America. And the truth is that there were large, very complex civilizations of Indigenous people covering every inch of this continent. So when colonizers arrived, there were already very sophisticated food systems in place on this land, and it involved a lot of very advanced agricultural practices that were involved in very close management of the land. It was not just, we weren't just a bunch of hunter-gatherers out here, eking by a living, gathering nuts and berries in the woods. We had a very sophisticated way of managing the land, of ensuring that the land was as healthy and robust as it could be. As we thrived, the plants, the biodiversity, and the animal populations thrived because of our interaction with them and our relationship with them. So this was all, and this goes for the Cherokee people in the Southeast and all of the Southeastern so-called, civilized tribes. They called us that because we were already very agrarian cultures. They could see similarities because we were already settled agricultural cities that were providing food for ourselves.
Right.
But we were doing it in a way that was regenerative for the land. And so we have this, this existence, right? And then colonization happens, and steadily over the course of less than 100 years, our land access is reduced and reduced and reduced until we have almost nothing left in our own homelands, and then we're pushed west. Little by little, all of us are, and the same thing happens in the East, and everybody is just kind of reduced down to these tiny reservations.
Right.
And so by the mid 1900s, we had it's a tiny fraction of the land access that we would have had with our ancestral lands.
Yeah.
And so without that land access, we lose the relationship that we had with the land, which was integral to every single part of our identity and culture.
Yes.
And that is the great loss that we're talking about when it's not just that we lost the land, we lost that relationship. And that was a huge part of everything that our ceremonies are tied to, and that our health and wellness are tied to, because, without our access to healthy traditional foods, we're forced, when you take an entire population of people and fence them into a very small area that they're not able to farm, forage, or hunt, they become reliant on the U.S. government for sustenance. And that's where we see reliance on government commodity foods, which were the opposite of everything that we had been surviving on for 10,000 years. The extremely diverse, varied, and nutritionally dense diet that we had was condensed down just in the same way that our populations were reduced and that our land access was reduced. We're reduced down to a box with some canned spoiled beef and some white flour and sugar and coffee and rancid lard. And it was like, raise your family on that. And that's where we are today. And so not only is there a huge shift in our active lifestyle, we don't have the land, we don't have the lifestyle that we had. So everything becomes this enormous depressant that lasts for generations. And so that is what we are working to heal right now, is the generational trauma and the physical health effects that were caused by that removal and that change in lifestyle.
Thank you so much for sharing so in depth about that. It's really important for people to understand the depth of what happened, as you say, in the genocide. Even going back into the history and reading through, there's so much more detail. And I encourage all listeners to go back and read about the history of what happened to Southeastern nations. I mean, it's happened all across Turtle Island, but this particular area, if you're not familiar with it, I definitely encourage you to study up and learn. I wonder if you could share from here how your original relationship to food began, and was that taught from your mother? Was it always a passion of yours, and were you raised in your traditional life ways?
Well, actually, I was raised in California and in Arizona for a little bit. So I was born in Bakersfield, and then my family moved north to Antioch in the Bay Area. And so that's where I grew up. And my father is Acadian, which is a French Canadian community in New Brunswick and Quebec. And so, and my mother is Cherokee. And so, but we were not raised traditionally with our traditional Cherokee ways, because of, you know, part of the history of removal expanded into residential schools and boarding schools, as we call them here. And so my family was a victim of that, the way, and assimilation, the way that a lot of Cherokee and other indigenous families were, where we lost our traditional ways, lost our language, lost our Cherokee names, naming traditions, and all of that through just through assimilation, forced assimilation, and the natural assimilation that comes from needing to survive in the situation that they were in. So my great grandmother was orphaned at a young age. And so she was put in the Cherokee Orphan Asylum here in Oklahoma. And so with her, basically her generation was where the traditional ways were lost in my family, because she was raised in that asylum without language and without any family to continue her traditional teachings. And so every generation of my family since then has not had any kind of Cherokee language or, you know, food traditions or anything like that. And then being removed physically so far, you know, my family moved to California for farming opportunities because they weren't able to support themselves on the land they had in Oklahoma. So they moved here, they moved to California, and that's where my mother was born and where I was born. And then kind of through fate, we were moved back to Oklahoma through my father's job. He was transferred to Oklahoma, to northeastern Oklahoma, when I was about 20 years old. So I was able to come back here and reconnect. But growing up, we were still very much a family that, you know, we ate around the dinner table every night together. We had home cooked meals. It was something that I didn't really realize was not an everyday thing, because when you're a kid, you just know what you know, you know.
Yeah, you take for granted.
But I realize now that it was a very special upbringing, that my mother made sure that we all sat down to eat together every night, and that that, you know, there wasn't so much of the takeout in front of TV. You know, we didn't really have that kind of experience of food. We always had a garden. So, you know, the origins of food were always very important to me. My mother was careful to choose extremely healthy foods and to show me exactly what was in every single thing that we ate. And so the origins of eating healthy started when I was a child that way. And then it kind of, you know, as I grew up, I got into the restaurant business, and at the same time, moving to Oklahoma, was able to start discovering my Cherokee heritage. And the first way that I did that was through communal meals with the Cherokee community. And one of the main ones that I started to go to, just as a way to connect and as a way to learn about my own heritage, was wild onion dinners in the springtime.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Wild onion dinners. Wild onions grow here, and they're one of the first plants to pop up in the spring. And so communities will all get together and gather up, you know, pounds and pounds of those onions, and dig them up together, clean them together, and then gather and make these meals where we saute the onions, usually in some bacon grease, and wilt them down until they're tender, and then scramble eggs with it. And so you have the wild onions and eggs, and then it's served with all of these side dishes that are all traditional foods. So it'll be things like fry bread, grape dumplings, and then even more ancient traditional foods like bean bread and fried hominy. And then there's also like salt pork, and it's kind of a mixture of, you know, modern traditional and ancient traditional foods. And it was just a great way for me to introduce myself to the world of Cherokee food all in one meal.
And it wasn't, I mean, it wasn't that you were specifically striving for that. That was just a natural thing that happened because you were connecting to your culture in general, right? It wasn't that you were specifically just focused on it was culture in total.
Yeah, I was seeking out a way, being that I was back in the homeland of my mother's people, I finally had a chance. Growing up in California, there wasn't as much access for me other than just knowing that I was Cherokee, being proud of that identity. I didn't have a way really to connect to the people and to my community. And so being back in Oklahoma, I was seeking out ways to do that, and being invited to these communal meals was the first way for me to really experience that sort of community belonging.
Mm,
And
mhm.
it was just perfect that it aligned through food, because as a chef, that's kind of already the language that I speak. So
Yes,
the language of
exactly.
food was the way for me to reconnect to my own heritage.
Hmm. Nico, we're going to take a break right here, and then we'll come back and talk about the inception of Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods.
All right.
We're back with Nico Albert, and we were just getting into the inception of Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods. So, Nico, if you could tell us how that was birthed as you were reconnecting to your Cherokee roots around food and the language of food there in your community.
Absolutely. So my knowledge of indigenous food started to grow just the longer I spent in community with my Cherokee relatives, really,
Mhm.
and I kind of dove headfirst into learning the history of our foods and the meaning of our foods to us and how they inform our identity. And with traditional Cherokee foods, always there are stories tied to it. And so it's just a very rich history, and a great way for me to be able to connect and understand what it is to be Cherokee. And along with that came learning a better understanding of our people's history and the true history of Indigenous people in America, because I had the same education as everybody else,
Mhm, mhm.
same
Right.
public school,
Yeah.
California public schools education. I didn't even know truth behind what happened to my own people. And so all of that has just been an educational journey that I've been on, since about 2003, really,
Mhm,
when that all
mhm.
started. And at the same time, I'm working in restaurants, kind of working my way up the ranks as a line cook, and then
Uh-huh.
eventually as an executive chef, running my own kitchens. And um, the more access I had, the more control I had over my menus, the more I would try to, include some of those indigenous influences that I had,
Uh-huh.
include some of those native foods, leading up to the last restaurant that I worked at, which was Duet Restaurant and Jazz Club, where I was able to actually, for November Native American Heritage Month, put on an entire menu of Native American specials,
Mhm.
just to really feature and highlight the food. And that
Right.
became pretty well known. Something that, for the 2 years before the pandemic that we were able to do that, it was something that our community really looked forward to
Mhm.
have, to be able to visit a restaurant and have native foods, because
Mhm.
believe it or not, even in Oklahoma, which is Indian territory,
Right.
we did not have any Native American restaurants at that time.
Mhm.
And
Uh-huh.
now we have one. We have Chef Jackie Siegfried has opened a restaurant called Native, which is amazing. Um,
Mhm.
but still not a very widely accessible type of food. And so people would really look forward to that. And people would approach me wanting me to, cater meals on the side, or come and talk about indigenous food, and
Mhm.
just share my knowledge that I had with either their students at different schools,
Right.
or with their community groups, because there was just this growing understanding that we have so many health problems and cultural disconnection problems in Indian country, um, that I had something that I could provide, which was reconnecting through our stories and through our foods, reconnecting to our identity through that. And to be able to provide a meal and provide the context for that meal was something
Sure.
that people started to approach me about. Um, and so that work was very fulfilling, but I really wasn't able to do a lot of it because
Mhm.
of the demands of the restaurant. You know,
Right.
being an executive chef is a more than full-time job,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I did what I could in the time that I had.
Right.
But I just found myself always wanting to be working with my community and talking about Indigenous food, and the restaurant, kind of became more of a like, oh, I got to get through this day job grind to be able to get to the
Mhm.
thing that's really important to
Right.
me.
So it was
And then
coming.
the pandemic came around and the restaurant shut down. And when they reopened, they weren't able to bring me back on. And
Uh-huh.
so I was kind of left in this, in between here, like, do I go and get another job or do I pursue this? And I
Mhm.
decided to go ahead and go all in and do all of the
Wanted to
necessary
do, yeah.
business work to create Burning Cedar Indigenous Foods as a legitimate, less of a side hustle and more
Right.
of a legitimate business. And so
Mhm.
that's what I spent quarantine doing, is applying for all of the LLC and building the website and just kind of building the network that I needed to come out and be able to offer this service that I do full time. And
Well,
that's what we've been doing ever since.
I think what you said that really stood out for me was when you talked about the meaning of foods and storytelling and how that is so much a part of Indigenous heritage. I mean, really for anyone living on this globe, the people always had some meaning attached to food, deeper than just, the physical characteristics or benefits of a food. It's so much deeper than that. It's profound.
Yeah.
So I really truly appreciate what you're doing and educating people and also inspiring, up and coming Indigenous cooks, right, to do and chefs to do this and pursue this. I think the world really needs this at this time. you know it's-
Absolutely. I get asked all the time when I'm going to open a restaurant.
uh-huh.
And the answer is never.
Because you know what that world is like. Yeah,
Because I know
the
what
grind
that
of it.
world is like.
Uh-huh.
And it's not that I'm elderly or anything over here, but my knees definitely feel like they are past the point of working a restaurant
Standing.
line.
Yeah.
And so what I really want to focus on is exactly what you mentioned, just inspiring future generations of Indigenous chefs, inspiring people to look at our food as something that has a place in contemporary culinary arts.
Hmm.
Our foods are complex and they're beautiful, and they connect us to the land and they connect us to each other, and they tell our story in a
Hmm.
way that the non-native community can understand us better.
Right.
And when there is that understanding, when we build those bridges and when people taste Indigenous food and can really feel the heart of what our community is like, and
Yes.
when they can understand our stories in that really tangible way that,
Mhm.
smell and aroma and flavor have these emotional impacts that
Yes.
that just talking can never accomplish. And so
Mhm.
food has that way of communicating that that can do so much to heal ourselves and also inform the public that don't understand who we are and that
Mhm.
have never gotten a chance to know us because our existence has kind of been
Mhm.
intentionally swept under the rug. It's like
Mhm.
America's dirty secret that no one wants to talk about.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
like, well, we can't do that anymore. It's not benefiting anybody
Mhm.
um, to kind of try to forget that this happened,
Yeah.
because it did, and we are still here, and our foods are still here, and they are a way for all of us to heal. There are things, it's not just for Indigenous people,
Right.
it's for all of the land that we share. Climate change is real, and there are things that are happening to our planet and to our resources that we all share
Right.
that need to be addressed, and they can be addressed through ancestral ways of knowing, because our ancestors had ways of stewarding the land that were regenerative and were healing. And so when people understand our foods and understand our way of connecting to the land, it's a way for all of us to heal, not just Indigenous people.
It is
And
unifying, the great unifier. Food is the great
yeah,
unifier.
food is. I mean, think of how, I mean, you can have very difficult conversations, and I do almost every day. You know,
Mhm.
it's not a fun dinner time conversation to talk about genocide, but it's necessary. But if you do that over a very comforting bowl of stew with, you know, with all of these wonderful stories that go along with it, it's
Right.
a way of just kind of allowing people to relax and accept information that would have been very difficult to discuss otherwise.
Yes.
And so being able to also to give that back to my community and, you know, teach young chefs how to prepare those dishes, yes, but also how to relate to the foods and how to share them in a way that people will understand and appreciate. That is, that's what's so important to me. So that's why never a restaurant. I will
Right.
always,
Right.
that's my focus now going forward, is to be able to build up my community to prepare these foods in their own homes, and then possibly to reach out to young people who could, you know, open their own restaurants and be able to share this in a way that I no longer can
Right,
or
right,
want
right,
to.
right. Yeah, just increase the scope and the scale of things, you know, by spreading it
Yeah.
out there. Just
And the
more
visibility, I mean,
education.
part of the reason that there are not Native restaurants is that Native people ourselves have been raised with the idea that people wouldn't want it, which is
Uh,
heartbreaking. But it's a truth that, you know, it's an ingrained, it's almost like a
indoctrination.
systemic form of racism that is internal,
Mm-hmm.
that we've been raised with. It's a product of the education of boarding schools and assimilation, telling us that, you know, the things that make us Indian are not worthy of being shared, or that are not good enough for the mainstream culture. And that is shifting. That tide is turning, and through all of the wonderful examples of representation that we have now in media and art, and with restaurants like Owamni and Wapipa's Kitchen in Oakland, we're seeing examples where people are saying, our foods are delicious, they're beautiful, they're vibrant, they're modern, and they should be shared. And that's the message, is that, you know, the more we increase this visibility about our food, the
Mm-hmm.
more people want to try it. They want to try and
Yeah.
experience these foods now. And so we're changing the perspective for people and changing our own minds in our own community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I first started burning Cedar Indigenous foods, even, you know, folks in my own family and community, there was this debate over, you know, when I was kind of workshopping the idea, like, should I do this or should I do it this way? And
Right.
a lot of people were saying, well, maybe it should just be Nico's catering company and you do all kinds of different foods because you can make everything.
Right.
And don't pigeonhole yourself to just Native food, because people might not, you know, your business might not be as good if you only do Indigenous food.
Right.
And that is just it.
Not
That's
the true at all,
colonization.
right?
That's colonization speaking. And
Right.
so it's important to me that we spread the word that Indigenous food really is something that can stand on its own.
Absolutely. 100%. You know, we've heard the words decolonize your diet for years now. And I wonder, do you find these words not as relevant now? It seems almost like we've evolved to another level. Like when you say revitalizing Indigenous foods, there's something about, I don't know what you feel about that terminology, and if you would express that differently.
Yeah, you know, there has been a shift away from the idea of decolonizing and toward the idea of indigenizing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it does feel like a healthier perspective to
Yeah.
me, for us to embrace all of our indigenous ingredients, indigenous techniques,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, focus on the accomplishments of our people
Right.
rather than trying to remove or take out the elements of colonization, which is daunting because we do live in a colonized space.
Mhm.
I think reintroducing our Indigenous elements is something that is more uplifting for our people than working. I mean, we can
Again,
still work on decolonizing
right.
spaces too, but
Mhm.
I prefer to come at things from a perspective of reintroducing our Indigenous ways and our Indigenous ingredients, and um, I think it's more approachable a lot of the time too,
It's more
because
empowering. Yeah, and
yeah, it's
inspiring, I
so
would say.
empowering.
Mhm.
And there's just one of the things that I love to focus on when I give talks and things is the the technological and you know just the knowledge that our ancestors developed and had
Mhm.
for both cultivating crops
Mm.
and managing land and sustaining our people. The technological advancements that they made um, thousands and thousands of years ago are things that we still use to this day. Like the process of nixtamalization is the one that I focus on really intently with beginning students of mine, because that is a pretty advanced chemical reaction process to
Mm.
use to unlock nutrients in field corn,
Yeah.
that our ancestors developed
Yeah.
9,000 years ago. And
Mhm.
so it puts our ancestors in a perspective that they haven't been seen before. And I
Mm.
think that that is very empowering for people to understand that, we're not coming from a long line of simple hunter
Right.
gatherer primitive people. That we're not coming from primitive people, we or savages, the way that a
Right.
lot of American history has framed us. It's
Mhm.
changing the way that we frame our ancestors and saying we are these people who were very technologically savvy, and our ancestors were scientists. They observed the natural world, they made these observations and developed their own processes based on the natural world, you know,
Mhm.
and then created very successful communities out of that knowledge. And so look back on our ancestors that way and then carry that pride with us
Mhm.
forward.
Mhm.
Learn from, that's this 7 generations principle that many Indigenous people live by, which is we take the knowledge and the teachings and the everything that the 7 generations that came before us, that our ancestors gave us, and
Mhm.
we carry it with us and we take it and we look 7 generations ahead with every decision. Every step that we take
Mhm.
is looking forward. And so, you know just reframing our ancestors that way allows us to move forward with such a different perspective on ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, with
And
incredible dignity and creativity, I would say as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What would you like to say to younger generations regarding their ancestral life ways and traditional foods? We just have like a minute before our break, but if you could
Well,
address.
really, it's just to be proud and to dig in and talk to any elders that you have about their memories, and and try to find ways to bring those memories back into your life and make them an active part of our lives today, because
Mhm.
all of these things that our ancestors developed and all of these foods that they ate and that the relationship that they had with the land, we can have that today too. We're not, these things are not dead, they're not over and gone and in the past, they're with us today. Everything that our ancestors have survived for is with
Right.
us today. And so it's up to us to make that a part of our lives and carry it into the future. That's our responsibility as future ancestors.
Ah, yes, yes, yes. So Nico, we're going to take a break right here and we'll come back and we'll talk a bit about some of your collaborations with other Indigenous chefs and tribal nations.
Absolutely.
We're back with Nico Albert once again. And Nico, we would love to hear about some of the collaborations you're engaging in with other Indigenous chefs, how you're working with other tribal nations.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of my work brings me into collaboration with a lot of other people in the food sovereignty movement. There are a few chefs that I work with here in Oklahoma that I'm friends with. You know, we like to share ingredients and share techniques and all of that, because it is a small community of those of us that are doing this work. But a lot of what I do, you know, just recently I was at the Oklahoma State University technology with their culinary program, working with some of their students, and they are on the Muskogee Creek Reservation lands. So they have a lot of Creek Nation students. And so it was really exciting and energizing to work with some young culinary students who are Indigenous and very excited to learn about their traditional foods and how to prepare them and hopefully incorporate them into their culinary careers. And then, you know, we've also done some work in different areas with different tribes, like the Pawnee Nation have a wonderful seed preservation project that's run by Deb Echohawk. And she's been an incredible resource for me, a mentor. As an elder, she has so much knowledge about seed saving and about how our ancestors used these seeds, and, you know, traditional recipes that she's gathered over the years that she's been able to share with me. So that's part of, you know, part of that exchange that happens. And, you know, I've created Burning Cedar Sovereign Wellness, which is our nonprofit organization, as sort of a means to be able to invite collaboration from other chefs. I've been able to travel extensively this last year, going up to Minneapolis and visiting with the Indigenous Foods Lab and Natives run by Sean Sherman, and be able to kind of pick his brain and get some guidance on you know, how to proceed with our organization down here, using kind of the same model of building a community where we can gather people together to learn about traditional foods and learn about traditional ingredients, and see a teaching garden where we can show people how these foods grow and how to use them. So he's been an excellent asset to communicate with. And there's all these different conferences that happen throughout the year where Indigenous chefs get together, and everybody in the food sovereignty movement, just to, you know, share seeds, share stories, share all of our knowledge, because, you know, none of this is things that we want to covet for ourselves. You know, that part of the beauty of our organizations is that none of the Indigenous community is about that competition that comes with the commercial, you know,
world.
the capitalist world. And that's a big difference. And, you know, people always ask me, oh, are you willing to share that recipe, or is that like a secret ingredient? And I'm like, of course. It's not mine.
No, I need to trademark, copyright it, and
Yeah, no, never. These recipes are ours. They're for everyone. And I'm so happy to share them all the time. You know, I'm bad about getting my emails out with the recipe because I'm so busy and scatterbrained, you know, but
you've got a lot of them.
But when I do actually settle down enough to send all of those out, I am more than happy to share them. And other chefs that I work with feel the same and are happy to share their recipes and ideas and ingredients and sources, because the more we get these foods out there, the more it lifts all of us up, and the better it is for all of our communities. And the idea is healing, you know, healing through these foods. So I would never, you know, keep that from somebody. The idea is to get it out there and get people cooking again, get people away from those from those, you know, processed foods, and say, you know, here is a simple recipe. You can learn this recipe and turn it into all of your own recipes. You know, you can expand just from this basic, you know, set of ratios and turn it into all of your, you know, be creative with it and use the ingredients that you have access to create something new, because that's how we move ourselves forward.
Right. Well, I think the thing is getting people to re-indigenize and around their foods, also ensures that more of these foods will be grown and continue
Absolutely,
for
yeah.
the future, for 7 generations. And that's so important to bring back many of the foods that have, been, they've kind of gone by the wayside because of other things that have come in, or all this kind of monocropping and different things that have come into the food systems. But
Yeah, we're really right in the middle of this movement and this work to reestablish our ancestral seeds and varieties of crops, and to change people's minds about their farming methods toward more regenerative agriculture methods. And it's all part of, there's the Intertribal Agriculture Council that does so much incredible work to teach the future generation of farmers that ancestral knowledge about how to work with the land instead of against the land, and how monoculture farming is so destructive, yes, to the environment and to biodiversity. And so trying to reintroduce all of these different indigenous concepts of farming and show people how to grow these foods and encourage people to grow these specific foods. We're at this point where, the access to our ancestral foods is more difficult right now, because we're not, it's not like you can just go to the grocery store and buy these things. Right. You have to seek them out. And that's part of it, is that, indigenous foods are never going to be at Walmart and at these, huge, they're never going to be commodities, because that's not the relationship that we have with them. You can't have a relationship with a commodity the same way that you have with something that is grown in small community farms. And so the idea is that we have to change people's perspective on how to access food, and that is that food comes from community. It doesn't come from an individual, capitalist system. And so it's a big job to change our whole lifestyle and relationship with food. But that's what it is that indigenizing our perspectives on where food comes from and how we access it is part of building up that infrastructure so that we will have access to more of it.
I could see something like an indigenous farmers market, though.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if those already
farmers
exist.
Markets, co-ops, all of those different, CFAs, all of those different methods are incredible, resources and ways to improve access to indigenous foods. And there are a lot of, commercially available native foods now too. There's lots of different, now that we are able to buy things and ship things over the internet, that has allowed us to open up and be able to, access foods that we normally wouldn't be able to. Like, I use tons of wild rice from the Red Lake Nation. I use tepary beans and wheat berries and corn from Ramona Farms in Arizona. I'll use cornmeal from the Ute people in Utah. I use maple products from the Passamaquoddy people up in northern Maine. There's just so many different indigenous, either tribally run or indigenous individuals who have started food businesses. And so getting those names out there and getting people to support those businesses are also ways that we support food sovereignty and support each other in making sure that we're taking advantage of the foods that are available from people that are caring for the land with indigenous values in mind. That's part of it, is that when I buy my maple syrup from the Passamaquoddy people, I know that they are treating the maple trees that they get their maple syrup from. I know that they're treating those maple trees like they are their relatives, because that's how they see the maples, is they are people of the maple trees. So those are their ancestors, and they're never going to take more than their ancestors are willing to give. They're never going to take more than the land is willing to give. And they're always going to give something back. They live in a reciprocal relationship with those maple trees, because that's the relationship they've had for generations. And it's the same with, the people that I buy corn from and the people that I buy that wild rice from. And so supporting Indigenous producers is a step in the right direction toward land stewardship across the board.
Is there any kind of Indigenous food network like that where people can access, like they want to buy from, native nations who are doing this? Does that exist?
The Intertribal Ag Council has a website where they keep a pretty well updated map of Indigenous food businesses. And so you can find ones in your area, and then you can find ones across the country. And they're working to build and build that out. And so they're a great resource, and you can also contact them directly. And they have people that, not all of the Indigenous producers are really to the point where they, have this online sales model yet. It's not necessarily available on Amazon or Amazon yet.
And they may not want to. I mean, there's
a lot of times it is like you've got to send an email or a DM to somebody and say, hey, I want to buy your corn, or
write a letter.
Something like you've got to write a letter. But it's worth doing, because you're going to get an incredible product. You're going to establish a relationship with somebody. So the Agriculture Council is a great resource to find people and communities to reach out to and make relationships with.
That's wonderful. I want to go back to the original Cherokee homelands, the area of what is now known as today as Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. And I'm wondering if you personally have connected to these places or the place of your, ancestors, and if you have done work there around native foods in the place of, your original ancestors.
I have. And I can't tell you how powerful it has been and how healing it's been for me. It was just actually this past March that I was able to travel back to the Appalachian region of North Carolina. There's a town called Cherokee, North Carolina, that is the heart of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. And that's where our mother town is. It's called Gadua. And it is the original, mound structure where our people are said to have emerged from. And it's surrounded by 7 mountains that are 7 sacred peaks where all of our teachings come from. Every story that I've learned from elders and from relatives and from reading, every story that I know and every recipe that I know originated in this area right there. And to return there and set foot there and like breathe that air and forage from that land, and it was something that I struggled to put into words, because it was a feeling of homecoming. And the welcome that I received from my Eastern Band relatives was also just the first thing that any of them said to me was welcome home. And they literally and figuratively embraced me as a relative. And they see us as just their Western Band relatives living here in Oklahoma, and they always welcome any of us to come back home and reconnect to our homeland. And so being back there, I've had the opportunity to go back quite a few times this year. And I've taught, given workshops on traditional foods and shared recipes, shared ingredients. Every time I come, I bring, some kind of seeds or some kind of, food from here. And then there's always something for me to bring back with me. Like this last visit, I was able to gather some chestnuts, and which is a tree that is almost entirely extinct. I mean, a lot of people do think of it as extinct, the American chestnut. And it was a food that was at one time a staple for our people, because the American chestnut was even more widespread than like the pecan or the black walnut. It was it covered every inch of Turtle Island. Everywhere you could get chestnuts, and they were a big part of our food systems.
Mhm.
And there are all of these ancestral, ancient recipes that I wanted to try and couldn't because I can't get American chestnuts
Right.
anymore because
Mhm.
of the chestnut blight that came with colonization. The chestnut blight wiped out the chestnut tree almost entirely. But in Cherokee,
Mhm.
there are properties that have a few groves of these trees, and the trees still thrive within the Qualla boundary, which is the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians reservation.
Mhm.
And that has been there, they've never left. They've always been there taking care of that land. And so I was able to gather some chestnuts, and I haven't made anything with them yet, but I will be making a very special batch of chestnut bread
Mm.
to be able to share that with my community here in Oklahoma, because most of us have never even gotten to taste that.
Are they
And so
trying
that's
to reforest the chestnut? Since you say these trees are still alive, are they trying to actually?
yes, they are
Okay.
doing work to, what they're having to do is hybridize the American chestnut with the Asian chestnut.
Mhm.
And the Asian chestnut is resistant to blight here. And
Oh,
so if they're able to, it won't be 100% the original
mhm.
American chestnut tree, because there's no way for us to ever get the blight to go away. There's nothing to stop that. So they're working to develop hybridized trees and then plant those,
Mhm.
and those are resistant. And so we'll be able to bring back that American chestnut. So
Oh,
that is happening, which is really exciting.
it is exciting. And I think,
Yeah.
again, more and more with this revitalization of indigenous foods, more and more of the original plants, the trees, there will be more of that happening.
Absolutely. And that same kind of work is happening with all sorts of plants. There's people out here working to restore biodiversity, restore the traditional pollinator species of plant, in order um, to reestablish the pollinator insects that we've been losing. And that all works toward healing the damage that's been done
Mhm.
to the land so far. And all of those plants not only benefit, pollinator insect species, those are plants that were traditionally foraged and used for medicine. So all of those, you know, working to preserve and reestablish those plants is just working to reestablish our relationship with them as medicine and food plants as well.
And
And so
cultural.
that's a lot of the work that I do when I go back home to the Eastern homelands is trying to learn what plants they use for medicine there, because a lot of things were lost along that Trail of Tears. Um, Not lost, but just they've adapted and changed for a new space. And
Right.
so being here in Oklahoma, we have different names for things. We have different medicines, different songs, different, the language has changed.
Right.
We pronounce things differently. We speak the
Sure.
language differently than.
Evolution would be naturally different because of.
Yeah, and so going back to the Eastern homeland, I'm able to see the differences, and they respect those differences too. It's never this thing where it's like you're saying that word wrong or
Mhm.
you're singing the wrong song.
Sure.
Um, they very much embrace that this is just the way that our people have adapted, and but we can learn from each other.
I wanted to ask you, with Burning Cedar Sovereign Wellness, because we've talked a lot about this, a lot of how much the food informs the culture and also heals and provides health for the people. And how would you describe what sovereign wellness looks like? We've got about a minute for you to comment
I
on
mean,
that.
sovereign is such an important word, and that's why I used it in the title of our upcoming wellness center. Sovereign says everything about our existence as Indigenous people in modern day America, because we are sovereign nations within another nation. And that's something that a lot of Americans have a hard time understanding. And even Indigenous people, Native people, we have to embrace that concept of sovereignty, which is that we have our own set of laws, governance. We have treaties that need to be upheld, that
Mhm.
protect us and protect our way of life and our culture
Mhm.
through this idea that we're our own nations and we have jurisdiction over ourselves.
Right.
And so that is how we protect our culture, is that this is the culture of a sovereign nation. So our access to land is protected by our sovereignty. And that access to land is how we heal ourselves, because we need to be able to grow our traditional foods and access our traditional our medicines and practice our ceremonies. And all of those things are protected by the sovereignty that we hold as nations. So sovereign wellness is our ability to heal ourselves through our own ancestral knowledge, and then pass that knowledge on to future generations.
Nico, thank you so much for all that you have shared and what your life work has become around Indigenous foods and protecting and preserving and sharing ancestral life ways of your peoples, and also sharing that amongst other tribal nations. So much respect. I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I know it will just continue to increase with the land back movement and everything else that's happening. So it is an auspicious time right now. You know,
Really
there's a point, and I feel that. So I wonder if you could share with listeners how they can stay connected to you, your work, and follow you, what you're doing.
Yes, we are on Instagram and Facebook at Burning Cedar Foods. And then you can access our website, burningscedar.org. And there's tons of information about both the catering side of the business, and there will be increasing information about Burning Cedar Sovereign Wellness. I encourage you to follow the path that we're on with Sovereign Wellness, because 2023 is going to be a very big year for us. We are looking at opening a physical location here in Tulsa for us to build a community space where we can offer a teaching kitchen, teaching garden, services for expectant mothers, where we can bring new life into this world using our ancestral medicine and ancestral community building ways. And so all of that will be documented on our social media and through the website. And we would love to connect and receive your support and love. And you can follow us. And there's also, I'd like to point out, a community page on our website, burningscedar.org/community. And that website is a great way to access all of those Indigenous food companies that we've talked about. I have links to all the different food companies that we have relationships with, that we buy from, and you can access those foods and try and bring them into your own diet as well, and support those Indigenous food producers.
Thank you, Nico, and thank you to all those who are keeping Indigenous foods thriving and moving into the next evolutionary stage for all of this continent, all of Turtle Island. You know, we see there's a incredible resurgence, and we're enthusiastic about the future with Indigenous foods and Indigenous peoples, just the empowerment of Indigenous peoples.
Yeah, it's a very the energy right now is incredible, and it's building, and so many people are doing incredible work all over in all of their communities, and we're just happy to be able to play our little role here in Oklahoma as part of the larger movement. It's wonderful to see, and we encourage everybody to be a part of it.
Be a part of it. Thank you, Nico, for coming on the show, and more power to you.
Widow, I'm so happy to have been here. Thank you for the conversation.